Well, Robert Tellis is a former Clark County public administrator in Las Vegas, Nevada, accused of the brutal murder of Jeff Gman, a well-known investigative journalist in the area. The case has garnered significant attention due to the high-profile nature of both the victim and the individual accused in this murder case. And we got to keep in account of the circumstances surrounding this horrendous murder. I'm here in Bryant Park in New York City. I'm getting ready for some meetings with Law and Crime. I'm going to be talking with Jesse Weber this morning, and then I'm heading over to Fox on a documentary I'm working on homicides. Now, Gman was found dead outside of his home on September 3rd, 2022. His death was the result of multiple stab wounds. Gman is best known for his investigative reporting on corruption topics and other sensitive topics in the Las Vegas metro area, including a series of stories about a guy named Robert Tellis. Stories that have contributed to Tellis losing his pre-election bid. This was a pre-election bid. Tellis is accused of murdering Gman, a reporter who tried exposing him and his antics while serving in his political position in Las Vegas. Gman was brutally stabbed outside of his home. He was a journalist who was a local legend in the Las Vegas area. Throughout his career, he did reports on infamous mobsters, murderers, crooked politicians. This guy wrote about the things that were being done by crooks, particularly in Las Vegas. And over his 40-year career, he put a lot of stories out, but in the end, he would be brutally stabbed to death at his home. It was a personal attack. 4 of the stab wounds were on Gman's neck, and almost immediately, his most recent journalistic target, Polk County Public Administrator Robert Tellis, floated to the top of the possible suspect list. Now, Gman had been a journalist for decades and clearly understood the challenges and the threats posed by looking into cases like this. Those are the things that came with the job. And I was asked on Court TV about this, and I shared these comments.
Mike, as we look at all of this and we look at these allegations and what is sort of brewing in the life of Robert Tellis, but also Jeff Gman at the same time, I can't imagine that this was the first time that Jeff Gman had gotten under the skin of someone.
Oh, yeah. And, I love some of those photos of Gman because he looks like a really likable and a pretty fun-loving guy, but he's a bulldog and he really digs into stories and undoubtedly has faced other situations where people have maybe reminded him of the power that they have. You're talking Las Vegas here, Vinny. Telling stories on a lot of people in Las Vegas could get you in one of those big old drums over at Lake Mead in the bottom of the lake, And so he clearly understood his job. He understood his role, but he also understood the importance of fairly reporting something and exposing something. And that's really the beauty of journalism, whether politicians like it or not, whether we like it as citizens sometimes. They are the ones who usually bring a story to the head.
Yeah, and politicians should expect and invite the scrutiny. That's how we keep them all honest. Trying to keep politicians honest? Did I just say that? Okay.
Gman had written a number of articles about Tellis, whom he reported was creating a hostile work environment in the office. Now, it's been publicly reported that his employees say that he thought that he was above the law. They say the workplace was toxic, and they were outraged that he reportedly carried on an intimate relationship with a woman that he supervised in the office. He flatly denied that charge, stating that he loves his wife deeply. All of that was coming while they were filming he and his co-workers secretly meeting in the back of a vehicle in the parking lot. Well, I spoke with Vinnie Politan on Court TV about this case, and I thought you'd like to see a couple of those discussion points.
Well, I think it reminds us how important it is that the people in the office understood what was going on. The people in the office had the relationship to hear maybe through the grapevine what was going on, and had the prowess to go out and actually capture the video. They knew when that employee was going to leave and the boss was leaving at the same time. And I think this really shows this power of position power and this position of trust that these leaders have, and the responsibility that they have to avoid even the appearance of evil in something like this. Vinny, I had a lot of meetings in my career. I don't think I ever did them in the backseat of a car with an employee.
No, doesn't work that way.
Now, Gman was reporting many of the concerns that he had during this pre-election, re-election bid that Telus was up for. To counter that, Telus tweeted out that Gman was just going after her, that he was a liar. He even went as far as calling Gman a wild animal who was obsessed with him. Well, in the end, Telus lost the primary election, and many people say it was directly related to the reporting that Gman exposed and put out in the newspapers. Some of that had to do with these in-office ongoing affairs. Well, on September 3rd, 2022, Gman was murdered outside of his home. The assailant in this case was wearing an orange reflective vest, had a large kind of straw sun hat on, and he had these really identifiable white athletic shoes. He was seen carrying a shoulder bag as he walked down the street. And after the murder, when police put this video out on TV, one of Telus's co-workers reported to police that the walking gait of the man in the video, the suspect on surveillance video, reminded them of the way that Telus walked. Even the dress of the killer caught the attention of people. And in this Court TV video, we can see that video and we can talk a little more about it.
I want to put up a picture of the man wearing the disguise, because once you get a closer shot of this, you can see kind of what's going on here. So let's take a look at that. It's got this really, I don't even know what to describe that is on the head of the suspect here, but it couldn't be a brighter orange jacket that this person is wearing, and carrying a bag. So, Mike King, I'll begin with you. As you start with a suspect who's dressed like that, as an investigator, what's going through your mind?
Well, I mean, the first rule of being secretive is not to dress in a big old flashy reflective orange vest and a hat that's going to stand out like crazy, especially knowing what happens a little later into this investigation. But immediately you're wondering, number one, the heat down there. I get that some people dress and do that to protect themselves from the heat, but is this clothing really something effective for those temperatures that they have in Vegas? And frankly, is it something that would even be appropriate? Most predators will take the time to blend into an area. And it's usually when someone doesn't blend into an area that they're ratted out pretty quickly by cameras or by eyewitnesses who happen to see them in the area. They stand out just enough. And that's probably the biggest mistake this guy made from the very beginning. Whether it's Telus or somebody else, they're really standing out. I'm expecting that big old blue bag to be filled with candy at Halloween, Vinny.
Well, as police looked closely at Telus, they also found that it was coincidental that Telus drove a maroon Yukon Denali, something that appeared to be the same kind of vehicle and same color of vehicle as that noted on surveillance cameras near Gman's home at the time of his murder. Now, this was also noted by Telus's co-workers who drove by Telus's home after the murders, and they noticed Telus actually outside of the house, in front of the house, washing that same vehicle. Well, 4 days after Gman's murder, and during the early morning hours of September 7th, Metro Police brought Robert Telus into the police department to question him. There, they collected DNA samples from him. And then they served a little later a search warrant on his home, where they recovered the remains of a white pair of athletic shoes. And they were tucked away in a really peculiar place. They also found a hat that resembled the hat that was being worn by the assailant in the murder video. And that hat had been cut up into pieces and hidden somewhere else in the home. And believe it or not, they found an orange reflective vest, and they even found a handbag, a shoulder bag, that matched the bag worn by the assailant in the video. Well, I think it was clear that the evidence technicians hit the jackpot when they got that sun hat cut up into pieces. Again, the color and the style of the hat worn by the killer in that surveillance video. But the biggest piece of evidence, quite arguably, is Tellis's DNA, which was later analyzed and found to match the DNA recovered under the fingernails of the victim. Police removed Tellis from the house by stretcher when he reportedly made threats of self-harm after he had been interviewed. He was placed in the hospital and after a few weeks booked into the Clark County Detention Center, where he was indicted by a grand jury for murder. Tellis pled not guilty, and by October of 2022, prosecutors announced that they would not pursue the death penalty in the case, but they were going forward with the murder trial. And with that, the days started slowly rolling by until his trial, which had just begun. You know, as Vinnie Politan and I discussed this murder case, our conversation rolled around to my time in the Attorney General's office and the investigations that I did into corrupt public officials. Let's look at that video.
Mike King, you've worked for the government. What do you think of this? I mean, this is what journalists are supposed to do, right? Take a look at what's happening in public offices.
Exactly, Vinny. And, you know, I think back to my time when I was chief of staff at the Attorney General's office, we would get allegations like this coming in, and you have an obligation to immediately dig into it. But when a news reporter comes and says, hey, I've got some heavy duty stuff here, I've got videotape, I've got people who are willing to come in and talk about problems in the office, feelings of coercion or favoritism, and in this particular case, relationships that are happening inside of the office where someone who has a supervisory role and a position of responsibility and power over a subordinate having a relationship with a subordinate. Those are all big, heavy-duty things.
Well, there have been some really interesting theatrics in this case, including Tellis challenging the court on several issues. He even tried to represent himself at one point in the trial, and the judge cautioned him again and again not to try to represent himself. Tellis, in the end, chose a defense team to kind of build a case around him. But in all, I think this guy has gone through like 4 different defense lawyers as he's getting prepared and now going to trial. So as you watch this trial, here are a couple of evidentiary things to watch out for. I think they're the kinds of things that will be the most decisive and the biggest problem to overcome in this trial. First, I want to talk about those previous tensions between Tellis and Gman. Keep in mind that Gman had written several articles that were critical of Tellis, his ability to manage, and what he considered to be possibly misconduct within the public administration office. Now, these reports highlight the inappropriate relationships that were going on, including, most particularly, that inappropriate relationship with a subordinate. He talked about the work environment and the leadership of Tellis, and frankly, the hostile work environment according to the employees. The articles by Gman cited as contributing factors to Tellis's defeat. Now that's really important because when he was defeated in that Democratic Party re-election in June of 2022, everything kicked into gear. Now the prosecution might argue that this provided motive for Tellis to seek out revenge against Gman, including murder. The next piece of important evidence is the surveillance footage. You see, at the time of the investigation, police recovered surveillance video from the cameras around the Gman home. At least one video captured a suspect wearing a white-brimmed cap, reflective vest. The suspect's face was obscured, but the attire matched attire that Tellis was seen wearing in other footage taken about the same time as the murder. In addition to that, Tellis's vehicle, a maroon GMC Denali, was seen near the Gman home. This was all happening at the time of the murder, and it places Tellis at the scene. And don't forget about those white tennis shoes that were matched to the tennis shoes worn by the assailant. Another key piece of evidence is going to be the behavior of Tellis. Tellis's behavior in the days following the murder actually raised suspicion, mostly among those people who were closest to him. Now, he reportedly continued to work as if nothing had happened, despite the reality that he and the victim in this case, Gman, had had this ongoing conflictive relationship. He made public statements about Gman's murder that really troubled a lot of people. Some people to the point that his expressions of sadness or his offers of condolence seemed insincere to people, if not an overt attempt to deflect any suspicion on him. That's going to be key in this case, I believe. And then there's a search of Tellis's home. When law enforcement conducted the search of Tellis's home, they found items matching the clothing worn by the suspect in the surveillance footage, including shoes with a very clear marking that appeared to match the shoes in the video. They recovered a hat, although cut into pieces, that matched the hat that was worn by the assailant in that video that was captured at the time of the murders. And they recovered a handbag that matched a handbag that was in the surveillance videos. Not to mention that reflective vest that was recovered, also seen in that surveillance video and in surveillance imagery around the same time, showing that it was in fact Tellis. Now, I don't know if law enforcement was able to get any photographs or images of license plates off of the vehicle, but I suspect all that will come out into court. Now, I had these comments to say on Court TV that I wanted to share regarding the evidence that was recovered from Tellis's home during that search warrant.
Yeah, so they've got video at the crime scene of someone wearing shoes that are very similar to the shoe that's seized in the search warrant. But where it really gets tough for this guy to overcome, Vinny, is that now they forensically, according to public documents, have matched the shoe to imprint patterns found at the crime scene. So if and how they find residue like blood residue or debris from the home embedded into the shoe, he's got one incredibly tall mountain to climb.
And finally, a huge elephant in the room, the DNA. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Tellis is the DNA that was found at the crime scene, reportedly removed from underneath the fingernails of Gman, the victim of this murder. Not only does this physical evidence support the struggle that took place between Gman and the assailant, but the DNA convincingly places Tellis at the crime scene. The chances of the DNA belonging to someone else in this case was astronomical, according to court testimony. And all of this leads us to the likely issues that will be argued in this court case. And I want to suggest, while watching this thing, think about motive. The prosecution is expected to argue that Tellis had a strong hatred, a desire to harm Gman due to the fact that he had impacted his career by his journalistic reporting. This will likely emphasize how those articles that were written by Gman contributed to Tellis's political downfall, something that would have fueled his need or desire or motive for murder. And as you put all these pieces together, think about a circumstantial versus direct evidence case. This is a circumstantial case, but it does have some direct evidence. And while the prosecution has substantial circumstantial evidence, including that DNA, which I think is a little more direct evidence, while they have surveillance of the area and they have the timeline that fits, the defense is going to argue that there is no direct evidence. Things like eyewitness accounts. And you know how I feel about eyewitness accounts and the reliability of eyewitness accounts. But those are the kinds of things that courts like to see linking predators to crimes. Will it link Tellis to the murder of Gman? The defense undoubtedly is going to try to cast doubt on the veracity of the surveillance footage. And they undoubtedly are going to suggest that the DNA evidence, while compelling, doesn't conclusively prove that Tellis committed the murder. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I hope you'll put them down below, and I hope you'll respond to each other as you do so. With that in mind, the defense has to present a narrative that portrays Tellis as a dedicated public servant who was immensely stressed out and scrutinized by the police and everyone around him, unfairly targeted because of Gman's reporting. They've got to attempt to undermine the credibility of the evidence by insisting that Tellis's DNA could have been transferred to Gman's body in some kind of non-violent manner, including collection mistakes or mistakes made during the investigation or inside the laboratory during testing. I think it's going to be interesting if the defense enters into argument evidence that suggests that Tellis wasn't in his right mind. His mental health was in jeopardy at the time of the murders, and that he wasn't thinking clearly, and that his actions were not premeditated. Things just happened, perhaps even caused by Gman himself. It also wouldn't surprise me if Tellis's defense introduces alibi evidence that suggests that there was possibly alternate suspects who had a motive to kill this man. This would open the door for them to suggest that law enforcement incorrectly focused on Tellis because of their previous accounts around his reporting. So as a reminder in this case, let's look back at the timeline in this case, stepping back to May-June period of time. This is when reporter Jeff Gman started writing a series of stories that detailed allegations that Clark County Public Administrator Robert Tellis was involved in multiple complaints that were going on inside of the office, complaints that had been filed against him. When the June pre-election bid rolled around, the exposés came out and Tellis lost the re-election bid. The news articles continued into July and August. And all this time, Gman was making public records requests that apparently frustrated Tellis. And then, on September 3rd at 10:30 a.m., Gman's neighbor discovered Gman lying behind some bushes outside of his house. He'd been murdered, and the investigation was launched. 2 days after Gman's murder, police released images of their suspect, dressed in bright orange, wearing a long-sleeve shirt with reflective stripes on it. He had on this white-brimmed hat, black gloves, and he was walking with a peculiar gait past Gman's home. The person was carrying a dark blue or black shoulder bag. On the following day, police held a news conference in which they released the image of the suspect's vehicle in this case, a 2007-ish to 2014 red or maroon GMC Yukon Denali. And it had these chrome handles on it, a sunroof, and a luggage rack. They also released a video showing the suspect walking down the street, again, making note of his gait or the way in which he walked. Intrigued by the release of the videotape, later that afternoon, colleagues noticed that he was standing in his driveway next to a vehicle that matched the description of the vehicle shown in that police camera video that was released that day. They notified police, and the next morning, law enforcement was at Tellis's house serving a search warrant. They towed away his vehicle, and he was taken in for questioning, returned later in the day, but then again taken into custody for suspicion of murder. So this case against Robert Tellis hinges on a combination of forensic evidence, surveillance footage, and a clear motive stemming from Gman's investigative reporting that exposed Tellis's behavior. The prosecution undoubtedly will focus on the relationship between Tellis and Gman and the murder. All the while, the defense will be putting up challenges against the strength of the evidence and perhaps presenting an alternate explanation. The outcome of this trial is going to depend on how effectively either side presents their case, particularly how they address the circumstantial evidence, because circumstantial evidence is the majority of the evidence in this case. So with that, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on this case. What do you think happened to Jeff Gman? And do you think that Tellis is the kind of person who will try to take the stand in his own defense?
Yeah, there's something about politicians, you know. At one point, he convinced people to vote for him, Mike. So I guess he's going to try to get 12 more to vote for him as well, but vote not guilty.
That's exactly what I'm thinking, Vinny, is this is a guy who has been successful at being a chameleon or telling people the things that they want to hear. He obviously, with the idea that he wants to talk to the judge and represent himself and challenge issues in the courtroom, whether he's got a background or not, he clearly believes that he's the smartest cat on the block. And this is the kind of guy, I believe, that's going to follow the footsteps of an Alec Murdaugh and say, I'm going to take the stand because I am so good at what I do that I can convince this jury it wasn't me.
Well, from Bryant Park in New York City, I want to say thank you for watching Profiling Evil. Remember that you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And don't forget to check out our audio podcasts on Profiling Evil Podcasts. You can find them on your favorite podcast platform. And I hope you'll take time to visit our website at profilingevil.com. And please share us with all your friends. Hey, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button before the end of the video. And please give us a thumbs up as you do this. Thanks so much for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.